Good afternoon. My name is Tom Nasnick, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here, those of you in the audience and also those of you who are watching on our YouTube channel, to the William G. McGowan Theater at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Today we celebrate the coming of spring, although it doesn't quite particularly feel like it outside today, and the imminent blossoming of the cherry trees here in Washington, with a talk by Mark A. Klingler, illustrator of today's featured book, The Field Guide to the Natural World of Washington, D.C. This program is presented in partnership with the 2015 National Cherry Blossom Festival, and I'd like to thank everyone there for suggesting this program and remind all of you that you can find out all about this year's festival and all the exciting events and programs associated with it at their website, www.nationalcherryblossomfestival.org. Before we get to today's talk, I'd like to tell you about two upcoming programs here in the McGowan Theater. On Thursday night, March 26th at 7:30 p.m., we will present the 8th Annual Forum on Women in Leadership. This year's topic is Then and Now, Women in Civil Rights Leadership. MSNBC's Melissa V. Harris-Perry will moderate a panel that will discuss their personal journeys and the advice they would offer to young women in the struggle for equality. And on Tuesday, March 31st at 7 p.m., we will continue our commemoration of Women's History Month with a discussion of the historic ties between the temperance and women's suffrage movements of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This program is presented in partnership with the Sewell Belmont House and Museum and is in conjunction with our new exhibit, Spirited Republic, Alcohol in American History, now on display in the Lawrence F. O'Brien Gallery. To find out more about these and all upcoming National Archives programs and exhibits, please consult our monthly calendar of events. Copies are available in the lobby and online at www.archives.gov. Today's speaker is Mark A. Klingler. He is an award-winning artist at Carnegie Museum of Natural History in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he has collaborated with scientists for nearly 30 years to visually interpret the stories of newly discovered species as well as extinct creatures from the past. He is a recipient of the Society for Vertebrate Paleontology's Lanzendorf Art Prize and has illustrated popular science books such as Field Guide to the Natural World of New York City and Hunt for the Dawn Monkey. Would you please welcome Mark A. Klingler to the National Archives.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. And greetings from Pittsburgh. Our dinosaurs look forward to seeing you someday when you come and visit us. Our dinosaur hall has been renovated over the past few years now, and we have lots of room for the tails of our sauropods. They now can float in the air and just breathe. As before, if you remember the older days of the Carnegie Museums, the dinosaurs were in a very tight situation in the hall. Without further ado, I would like to share, back in 2005, 2006, I had the pleasure of sharing my work at the AAAS Science Headquarters here in D.C., just up on 11th Street. And there, during that time when we came to pick up the show, by coincidence, we tripped upon the Cherry Blossom Festival. And here's some photos from when we came back in 2006 to pick up the show. We had it on display, 70-some works on display for 5 months there at Science Magazine's headquarters. And the cherry blossoms were in full bloom, and we thoroughly enjoyed them. And if anyone can identify that helicopter, that would be helpful, because I'm not sure whose chopper that might be. But in any event, we really enjoy your city. And to be asked to share works of, I like to draw nature, on the side, it was just an honor to be asked to create images for a book about your city. And it's a really glorious city. So this is actually from one of the photos from that time. And here's my studio at the Carnegie Museum. I'm working on a little critter here called Jeremiah, and there's a drawing of it. And basically, I collect all kinds of references from the museums and from the conservatory. We have a wonderful conservatory, Phipps Conservatory, So a great tropical room with wonderful tree ferns, work from specimens, actual skulls, and reconstruct what these fossils may have looked like. Some individuals that have been inspired by, let's stand a little bit over here, are Charles Knight and Jamie Turneth. Charles Knight created some wonderful renderings and models of early mammals and dinosaurs. He was one of the first paleo artists to just dig into this and do this as a profession. He was constantly asked to come and join the American Museum in New York with Osborne, but he chose to keep doing freelance. Legally blind, he didn't drive, but he would do these wonderful little paintings and large paintings of the past, our history, and bring that to life. He even produced an article for the National Geographic where he wrote the article because he enjoyed writing, and he wrote about the just evolution, how it all started, early man, early dinosaurs, and he illustrated profusely. Fortunately, we have his works on display at the Carnegie right now. We have 10 pieces, and one was from a mural. It was a work-up painting, and he had other artists do the paintings on the walls, the big paintings, and he would do the original work-ups. Jamie Turneth is a contemporary working here in the Virginia area, and he works all over the world. He, when he was younger, worked at the Carnegie Museum as well, I understand. And I study his drawings because when you look at his works, it really is informative of how the muscles work and how that tells a story of what's going on the outside of the animal and how it affects the fur. And that really helps me for understanding how, from the bones, we can get to the fleshed out animal. Bringing you to a really neat story. I felt it might be fun to share a little bit of what I do at the museum before we go right into the book images. And one of the neat projects, it was hard for me to decide which project to share with you because I've worked on this critter. This little fossil up here comes from way back in the Pennsylvania area, 300 million years ago. And it was found by this gentleman, Eric Streetel. And it's a cast, this is a cast, it's not the actual fossil, of an early tetrapod. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Excellent. This tetrapod skull has lots of little ridges on it, and he thought, oh, this might be fern. But when brought to a scientist at the Carnegie Museum, he studied the patterning on the fossil skull and the teeth, and he realized, no, this is a tetrapod. So they took 2 years to prepare this out. And this young lady, Amy Henrici, prepared this fossil out for 2 years. She's our collection manager. And this is what the fossil looks like. And I'll do these drawings, technical drawings. And inside, it's palate. If you run your tongue on your upper palate of your mouth, we don't have teeth on our palate. But this critter actually has teeth on its palate. These teeth right here. And that's one of the characters that tells us about it. Over in the eye, it has this little pad. It's actually a bony structure that's inside the back of the eye. So when you push in like a frog eye, you won't hurt the eye. And these tetrapods actually have that structure in them. Here's a reconstruction based on working with other tetrapods. There's only a handful of these. But back about 100 years ago, they actually found more of the postcranial, which is everything beyond the skull. And the skull area is this skull here. That's where the eye would be. And here would be the nose, the neurals. There's the eye, jaw. And we're missing this part of the jaw. And back here would be the neck. And basically, my job is to work out what this thing looks like with the scientists. And Dr. Berman is the gentleman I worked with on this. And to do the reconstruction, I'll work up a pencil. In this case, I chose Then from the pencil, I make a patterning, so that way I have the patterns to make it look like a Gila monster. Because we're saying, oh, it's bumpy. It's going to have a bumpy texture like a Gila monster. And it's about a 2.5-foot critter. Here's our reconstruction. So I put all that together. I'm layering in Photoshop. And here's our, I'm studying all the plants to put it in an environment. This is basically when Pennsylvania areas, when Pennsylvania was actually below the equator in plate tectonic movements. And at that point in time, this is one of the earliest land walking critters. There were a number of tetrapods that came out of the water in evolution. And so the water is receding, the lakes are receding, and you're seeing things like cosmides and tree ferns starting to come up. But all these other, the early cosmides are kind of dying back, and you see the roots exposed, and conifers are starting to develop, which are big pine trees. And at the time, the dragonflies, their wingspan is like this. They're huge dragonflies. Here's our environment. And you can see that the lake is receding back, and everything is washing back. And then they asked me to work up a model for the exhibit of this tetrapod. And we actually even put in bird eyes, but the model's about this large, and I made it out of clay, and then we cast it. The technicians cast that model, and from there I would then work up that and paint it with acrylic, put the eyes in first. And the process was so intriguing to the Carnegie Mellon design program, of which I'm an alum of at Carnegie Mellon University. This is Hammerschlag. They asked if we could put something online on their alumni page. And so I wrote something up with my wife, and it talks about the process of how I went about reconstructing this critter and putting him in his environment. So, to bring us to the world of field guides. I've been inspired by field guides since I was younger than my daughter. And she's here with us in the back, Olivia. She's 6, and this is her first visit to D.C., enjoying it very much. She even got to see where the president lives. From the road, of course, like most people. But as a youth, I was always inspired by field guides. And one of my favorite ones was picked up at a flea market. It was the Butterfly Moth Field Guide, Golden Handbook Field Guide. And it had in just the basics, time frame when they fly, the host plants that they eat. Well, as I grew in the field of science art, scientific illustration, became a member of the Guild of Natural Scientific Illustrators, GNSI, headquartered here in D.C., worked with many scientists, worked with many illustrators, learned techniques. I became aware of Maria Sybil Marion. In her early works, she was raised in a printing family in the 1700s. And so she learned how to produce her own works, take a drawing and bring it all the way to a book. And she produced this wonderful a number of little handbooks for the gardener to learn about the insects that destroy their environments, but also just how the butterflies went from a caterpillar to an adult butterfly. They went from egg to caterpillar to a pupa, chrysalis, and to a butterfly. But she explained how the early parasites, the little wasps and bees, attacked those pupae. And she explained how these different things showed up. Because at that time, they were thinking that insects came out of the ground, even the flies and the wasps. They didn't fully understand how metamorphosis worked. And this is from her Suriname book. Later in her 70s, she went with her daughter to Suriname for 2 years and was able to document a number of beautiful stories of the natural history of butterflies and moths. Some other folks I've been inspired by are James Audubon and also Van Gogh. This is a study he did of emperor moth in Europe in the garden, and it just has the character of that moth in his painting. Some contemporaries Roger Torre-Peterson, unfortunately, is no longer with us, but he brought up the idea of rendering birds in his field guides, and then he put little arrows by the parts that were important, and just putting them in a very systematic format so you could see the characters quick, so that when you're in the field, you could spot the differences. Another gentleman who works at Smithsonian now, he is Vishai Malakio, and he did the Northeastern and Western field guides, which are wonderful pieces of work to work from and learn. What inspires me to do this work are the critters. And they could be anything from a snowy owl up at Presque Isle to osprey over in central PA just tearing apart a big fish, to a little moth called a ghost moth found up in Maine. And just give it a whirl and try to rear it. And with luck, my wife and I, we figured out how to rear this puppy. And I've been rearing ghost moths. I don't know why I tripped on them, but I did. So to kind of document this information, I use a Parashot camera. It's nothing fancy, but it does macro work and it does telephoto. But if you just look at the different times of day to catch these things, this is early in the morning where the sun just cascades directly across your subject. And if you let the light, you go to the side and let the light cast on the subject, you can observe critters and get good documentation. Also, the website has great images. One of our hobbies is rearing monarchs, and I love taking pictures of birds and ducks on the local ponds at the golf course. They're good places to go because the golfers aren't out early in the morning all the time, and especially if the weather's inclement. Some of these images you may recognize from the field guide. This image I actually took directly from my photo because I like the posture, I like the attitude of this ringbill, and you can see a little line on it. Many of the species in the book are species that range a lot of the Northeast, all the way up in Illinois, down to Carolinas, and they migrate through. So you see some unique species here in the city that we may not see out in western Pennsylvania that often, but during migration we see them come through. And I've been fortunate to get photos of some of these species. And in our field guide, we try to share a number of the species that you would see on a regular basis through the city at different parks. Back in 90, I spent pretty much about 3 weeks going up and down from the zoo down to here, the mall, through the park system. I did a lot of jogging at that point, and I observed herons in the reflecting pond. I've observed different birds along the creek beds in the parks, all the way going up to the zoo. And even bats getting in the house, too. There was a bat that came in and just caught it with the jar. And we released it again in the morning. But here we have a picture of yellow-shafted flickers. They're moving through, and they stay in the tops of the trees, and they're doing courtship rituals where they flash their tails and flash their wings, and these are images that inspired our flicker for the field guide. I do maintain a small collection of insects because insects are quick on the wing. They move quickly. They're hard to see. They light on a flower and then move along. So in my past, I worked in entomology, and I learned a lot about preparation from a gentleman, Dick Satterwhite, and some other staff, Walt Zano and such, to where I could maintain a small collection of my own. And when I was moved into the dinosaur department, I actually, about 10 years ago, developed my own small collection of about 500 to 1,000 specimens. And it really helps me for getting the information. Now, for this book project, they wanted to have a full 100 images where we would actually take 50 new images and delve them in. And because our previous book was a New York field guide. So a lot of systematic notes, renderings, keeping time frames, many sketches, just trying to figure out compositions that would make a nice cadence throughout the book. So they're not just like target practice. And I was given a lot of room on this book where I was given a list and I didn't have too many reviews on the subject. I would consult with birders, local birders, one with Paul Depp, a local fisherman at the museum. And just, it allowed me a lot of freedom to express these critters to the best of my ability. And here we have some images that were partly used. We didn't use the one of the White House with the catbird in front on a bench. The author thought that might be a little too campy. The image with the monarchs, I chose of the Jefferson Memorial. Sometimes monarchs come up in the East Coast really early in March. My brother actually caught a female monarch in New Jersey, where I grew up, in the late March. But like today, it can be quite cold. So I chose not to put the monarchs in the sky coming north again on the East Coast. And they ended up using the image with wonderful chimney swifts dropped in for the cover. And my daughter likes to come and visit me in the studio, and we would draw together. And a few years ago, she came down and did some sketching with me. And so I've been really happy and thankful to do that and share my craft with her. Here we have some more thinking. This is one of the photos from my visit in 2006, and that's the image that soon later became the cover. I had no idea when I took the photo that it would be. About 2 yards behind me was Channel 11 News or the local news, taking photos of the same viewpoint that evening of the memorial. It was just a glorious evening, glorious day to catch the cherry blossoms. This is a specimen from my collection, and Howard Youth, the author that wrote the book, provided me with some local photos reference material, and this became the image that was used for the mourning cloak and the white cabbage butterfly. Here we collected some local Virginia pine, and I keep a small collection of pressed specimens. My wife loves to keep all kinds of different leaves from trees from all over the country, and which become a great reference tool for me to use for my book projects and so forth. This is actually, I take a lot of photos. If you talk to my wife, she goes through them to get the photos out for our photo books. And this is a snapshot out on the wire just coming out our front yard. We have a lot of birds that come in, and this image was used for the field guide. I'll do sketches when I see birds. This is during breakfast. I saw the bird on the birch tree, the blue jay, and I thought, oh, that's a beautiful way the tail would just drape down, the blue long. They have a very long tail. Some references off the internet. There's people that share work out there and they say you're welcome to use it. I use the internet for anatomy, for the details, for understanding parts of some of the specimens, the character, the anatomy, so that way I don't miss things like the little fringe on the edge of the Phragmites. Now, if you run your hand the wrong way, you'll cut your finger real quickly. And I try to grab the details, and then when I come in, take all those notes and information, then I'll work them up in a sketch. From the thumbnail, gives me the composition. And then I work them up on the actual Lancrel watercolor paper. It's a block, and they come all glued together around the edges. And that allows me to systematically do a painting, cut it off with the knife, and then work on the next painting. So I can run anywhere from 5 to 10, 15 paintings at one time. Well, if something's drying, I can work on another painting. If I need to do more research, I can do more research on that painting. In this case, I put the pencil down first, real light, and then lighten it with a kneaded eraser. This is hot press watercolor paper. So the Lancrel has a little bit of tooth, which is good for color pencil. So then I'll place down the watercolor as a base color in the background. Fills in the fine little divots, and that gives me all my highlight tones and my midtones. Then I'll come back in there with a little bit of natural light blue, deco blue. I'm using Prismacolor pencils, and also sky blue. Either one will work nicely. And then I use a white color pencil to blend it into the colors, just during the highlights, and that gives it more the feel as if the subject is outdoors. Then I come in there with not just the Prismacolor black, but the Prismacolor very thin black. It's a little bit harder lead, and you can get more detail with it. Work out all the detail in the black, and that it just pops the image. I don't know why, it just does. It works so well. It's kind of like the reverse of a old stone lift plate, where they did the black and white etching, or the stone plate where they did the drawing, and then they come back and hand color, the tip in the color. In this case, I'm going the other way around. I'm putting the color down first. So here's the initial sketch up, work up. Now this case, these were internet images to give me the anatomy. The long mustache, kind of whiskers, give me the spots. And then I put it in my own posture. And to do that, I didn't have a photo, so I apologize. But I'll make a little clay model sometimes, and that gives me the perspective. So I'll hold the clay model up, do a sketch, and for the paleo, sometimes I'll take photos of those clay models because they're a little more convoluted and complex organisms. In this case, I feel more comfortable with these critters. So they're very direct sketches. Here's our little millipede kind of things. And in that case, I chose to explode the image, make it larger so you could see that little critter on there. This is from my wife's leaf collection. Work out the leaf anatomy in pencil, and then layer in each one of these cells individually. And that allows me to work up the tone as I wish and put the shadowing on the sides that I wish. And it gives the attitude of the leaf, the crinkle, the bumps, the cadence. We're fortunate to get a seed pod. This was derived from a photo of the grackle way up in the tree. And then I go to modern images, like close-up images that people take with their really high lenses to get the color detail in the anatomy. So this is the washes of all the colors, and then a little bit color pencil, the white and blue, and some of the black detailing. And all of a sudden it just snaps. I'm always amazed when it works. But the colors all pop out. All those little colors come in there and give it that oily look, what the grackles are known for. And they just have that brilliance of color. So I'm trying to give that dynamic to it. In this case, we're jumping back a little bit to the field guide for New York. I actually used that image of the hawk, and a local photographer helped me out with the posture, and I put the markings for a pale male on it. And pencil, watercolor, color pencil, and the final image. Taking that image, and I want to make it darker. So I made a mask, put the color on it, and we end up with a little bit darker, more than normal color of most of the red-tailed hawks that you see around this area or around the country. There is some white ones, I understand, in Ohio and so forth, and out west in Idaho, leucistic ones. Every now and then you get the variety, but in New York they had the pale ones. So see, here's another workup, pencil drawing of something observed in our backyard. Pileated woodpecker. We observed a few years before, and I always wanted to draw this. So I had a good excuse to draw it, coming down the branches. We had two of them just hanging out in our backyard, just wandering around on the trees, eating, and it was just wonderful. We have a lot of trees in our yard, small little ranch, and have many trees, so we have lots of birds and critters coming through our yard to render. And there's our final piece rendered up. A lot of fun to observe these critters, but also to render them and share them. One of the things that constantly kept me going, I've been asked, how do you keep doing this? Because once you have the project, it's a big project. You can't shake it. And this one took 4 years. The first book took 2 years. And there was not much free time. This second book was 4 years, and it was a lot of work for 50 images. But the neat thing that kept me going is all these images are going to be shared with you folks and will be passed on. And that's what was fun, to share them. And then I share the paintings as well in art shows to inform the public. One of our images from the book, New York book, the backdrop was the New York skyline in Central Park. And we just swapped it from Roosevelt viewpoint onto the Kennedy Center of DC. So I work with layers, and then I'll maintain a small set of folio prints, just 5x7s in a little folio, so I can get a feel for the cadence and compositions. And every now and then you'll see a piece that has some extras dropped in, like this little skipper and little American blue. We've been fortunate. We brought in our nice fancy bird from the former book and brought him down to the Smithsonian here at the castle. Put him on a branch. And that vantage point was actually a photograph that Howard provided. So all this is from one viewpoint from the garden. We drew things like these little worms, right up to spiders, to bees, dropped in some butterflies. He wanted, instead of a moth, the larvae. That incidentally was from one of our rearings. My reference was my own snapshot, my own photo. I take a lot of photos. This is where it used a model and worked from some systematic drawings of fish to understand the anatomy, and a little naiad, a baby dragonfly, which they eat. Howard really liked this piece here. He thought that was fun with the big whiskers of the channel catfish. And my wife loves these little plants with the little wart plants, the little vines. And incidentally, this moss is excellent for critters like ghost moths and such. They love to hide in that. And I try to find interesting plants to put these on. In this case, this wood is actually a piece of old, real worn down and weathered cherry tree wood. And I thought that would be neat to put the frogs on, because it was found near the ground. This is a piece of driftwood for the turtle. And black snakes, I didn't want to just draw a curled up snake. I tried to break the norm. And what do rat snakes do? They're found in yards, and they also eat bird eggs. So they climb trees and they climb vines. I thought, how about have it coming off a vine, as if it just came from having dinner, perhaps? Used to observe wood ducks when I was a boy on small creeks and the rivers, and so I found this wonderful reflection in a parking lot, actually, in New Jersey, a number of years before, and I thought, oh, that'd be a nice reflection to put the duck on, because it reminded me of the reflections when I used to watch and observe wood ducks as a boy. Now, these little needles on here have little baby bagworms in them. So when I had the branch down, all of a sudden those needles started moving after they warmed up, and each one of them had a larva in them. And these birds are feeding on the baby worms and such. So trying to make things interesting for the person who studies, who really knows a little bit about critters, and try to make it fun. And this is our blue jay with the nice, elegant tail. They're such stately birds. This is from our birch tree, mushrooms on it. Able to show off the woodpecker, not in the normal sense of like a woody woodpecker. I wanted to try to make it more animated, character. They're proud of themselves. This is on a ginkgo, on a favorite branch by the bird feeder. And when I was feeding our rabbit, all of a sudden I saw these little green pieces of pine cone. And I looked up, and lo and behold, the squirrel's eating pine cone seeds. And it's taken each one of those couplets off, each one of those petals off to get to that seed. Groundhog, we have groundhogs in our yard, and that was done from a sketch, just observing it in our backyard, and then I developed it up to this piece. There's the Phragmites again, and there's our clovers, dandelion. And a lot of times, like in the sense of the dandelion, I actually went out and picked it and then did a direct drawing. A couple hours later, I was done with the workup of the drawing and then started putting the color in. So that piece was a one-day piece. Here we have our different pines, conifers dropped in, cone and all. That was from the pressed one. This is from a direct life study. This one's the leaf you saw before. And on the side, I'm always inspired by conservation and how people are able to protect the species we have around here. Because while there's buildings going up and streets going in, yeah, that helps us get around, we still protect the critters. Just coming in this morning, I saw some, it looked like a screech owl was hit. Well, that means there's screech owls around. There's clues. There's clues all around us that show what kind of critters are here. And that's what's neat, that we have conservation efforts to protect these guys. And one of these rare critters is the Schaus swallowtail down in Florida. It's an endangered butterfly, and it rears on wildline and generally hangs out in the canopies of southern Florida. I actually saw one back in about 90, when I was in Key Largo with some friends, and it was just gliding across the backyard along the shore. It was a gorgeous butterfly. They're very striking, and for an excuse to render one was just wonderful. Here we have some specimens in our collection at the Carnegie Museum, and that gives me the anatomy, the detail, the pattern. Some other people have rendered them in the past for stamps, conservation stamps, federal stamps. And look at that beautiful pattern on the bottom. So I decided to render the top view and then have the male darting by. And there's our final rendering. This was on display in a number of galleries, including the Peabody at Yale. Here, one of my wife and I's efforts for conservation for the community is we put together these conservation pages. This one talks about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly and how it rears up and comes out, and then we tag the butterflies. And in this case, I've chosen to work with a program out of the University of Kansas called Monarch Watch. And you can find information regarding that group with Monarch Watch online. And they have lots of educational stuff on there and so forth. So we produce these pages where it's a coloring page. I call them fondly coloring pages. And so I just do a line art drawing. I'm currently working on one on the Peregrine Falcon. And we have a pair right across the street from us at University of Pittsburgh on their Cathedral of Learning. The female Dorothy, she came from Kansas, so they finally called her Dorothy. And Erie, too, who came from near up by Erie, Lake Erie, she's had two males, one Erie 1 and Erie 2. She's produced a number of young, around 42, 45 have made it to full adulthood, and she has grandchildren now around the country. It's amazing. Peregrine falcons are just delightful birds. I've gotten to be about this close to one where there's a window in between me. Generally, I usually stand on the far side of the wall and use my telephoto. But during the time when they were tagging the babies, I was invited once, and she was on the other side of the window, and everybody was on the other side. And she knew her baby was inside. She wasn't happy. So they tagged her, tagged the baby one. And the babies don't know what to do with their claws, so it's just sitting like this in the hand of the worker. And it was still young enough that it didn't know what to do. But you could see it had all the anatomy ready to go. So if you want either of these pages, and I have a few other ones, just send me an email and I'll send you a JPEG of it. I have a PDF of these. This is a polyphemus moth, and I find them rather exciting to share. We had a show by John Cody at the Hunt Botanical Library in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon University, and James White, the gallery director, coordinator, and curator, he invited me to share some images of the life cycle. And that was the impetus for this piece, to develop this piece. And then we handed these out as well. We had them on display so people could take them with them and learn more about the polyphemus moth. Because as myself, John Cody, who inspired me on doing large moths and so forth, when I was a boy, I saw an article of his. I've always been inspired by these critters. He was inspired as a boy, and he loved to draw the life cycle of large moths, especially polyphemus, which he reared in New York. So it was an honor to share my work in an activity page and information on the life cycle. But also, I was asked to bring some of my specimens forward and share them in a display case to show the different types of Saturnian moths that he was depicting on the walls from around Pennsylvania and the U.S. And incidentally, you can look him up online, John Cody. He rendered all kinds of Saturniids from little places like Africa, just Indonesia, to Africa, to South America. He's been around the world collecting and rearing. People bring him moths. He loves to render moths. Here's a piece that I did for the state of California. It's a watercolor, not very large. It's a scratch board and with watercolor on it. And it allowed me to just tell the story of this moth. And it was before the internet, so I couldn't get much reference of the plant. So I actually was fortunate. The botanist at the Carnegie Museum at the time allowed me to dissect a flower and collect the information in sketches of the anatomy. So we rehydrated a flower and dissected it. Then I made a clay model of it. We were complimented on this. And the actual stamp we're not allowed to sign. This is from my piece of art that I put in there, so that way there's no line screen. So I signed it with an egg. I placed an egg for the moth. And the neat thing about this moth was it was described in 1880, 89. And then somewhere in 1910, they couldn't find it anymore. And they thought it was extinct for around 70, 80 years. In 1977, it was rediscovered and described the full life history and why it was so rare. The moth had an introduced species on Kern primrose in Kern County of California. It was an introduced species from Spain, and that species would rear right through. But it would die about halfway through. But this species would rear through, but it was being invaded by the other species. But also construction, habitat destruction, so forth like that. And this small little plant and this small little moth gets overlooked. And he reared around, I think he reared 15 or 18 specimens. And they're in the collection. And since 1990, they haven't seen the moth again. Now, the moth actually, when it's full-grown caterpillar, goes in the ground. And then when they get the rains in the spring, it digs its way out. It has little large claw-type scales developed on its front legs. And it digs its way out of the mud, out of the dirt, and comes out as a beautiful moth. So nature has really interesting stories all built in. The state of Pennsylvania invited us to put together a butterfly poster. The scientists at the Carnegie Museum wrote the text that would be on the back, and I had the opportunity to do these wonderful renderings of some unique species as well as common species that exist in Pennsylvania. Incidentally, the Idalia here, our regal fritillary, you can actually go to our just east of Harrisburg in Wind Gap. They have a national reserve, and they have the largest population in the east of the East Coast, east of the Mississippi, of these regals. There's over 1,000 specimens each summer flying through their fields. It's a wonderful little butterfly. It's pretty large, and as a boy I used to see them, but now you don't see them much because farming has been pulled back. We don't do as much farming, and these things really depended upon farming, and their host plant is violets, incidentally. The first book, we were sharing this book in New York City. Mayor Bloomberg kindly invited everyone, the press and the authors, to Gracie Mansion to do a small press release to promote our book. Here's some of the display at Science Headquarters, Association for the Advancement of Science, a very prestigious magazine, been published in there a number of times. And the director of the Carnegie Museum was so inspired by this. He not only funded travel to back and forth DC, but also a display at the Carnegie Museum to share my works, where we shared some 80s pieces as well. And recently, in recent years, I had a display at the state capitol. And what inspires me are these critters here in Pittsburgh, the monarchs, when we release them in our yard. And if you come to the museum, you might get to meet a dinosaur and tickle his chin just like I got the opportunity to. So please make your way to Pittsburgh and look up in the air. You might see Dorothy or one of her friends. We have eagles as well, and there's a wonderful eagle cam on aviary.com. And you can watch the baby eagles grow. You can watch the baby peregrines grow. They have a number of conservation efforts in Pittsburgh. And I'd like to thank everyone from the Johns Hopkins University Press, as well as numerous friends, and just thankful for all the opportunities of sharing my work. Thank you very much, folks. Do you folks have any questions of any sort? Be happy to. I understand you have to go to one of the speakers on the side. I'm not sure the form for that. You'll have to. I think you have to make it to a speaker because we're on a YouTube.
Can you announce your email address?
My email is Klingler, KLINGLER, at Carnegie, CARNEGIE, M for museum, N for natural, H for history.org.
Thank you very much for your excellent lecture here. I'm just curious that you're studying nature so closely and the exact artistic side. I'm just curious how you've been affected spiritually by looking at critters, animals so intensively over the years.
Well, I won't go into the pros and cons of spirituality only because the world is a very dynamic area and there's pros and cons to what the critters are all about and what we're all about. But myself, I believe in these critters. They evolved. They grew. But why did they show up so complex? You could look at a little tiny moth or a little fly, and under the microscope, even an electron microscope, and they're inherently designed, but there's inherent contemporary, there's partial evolution in there. There's partial development. These creatures are just so developed. So I'm always inspired by the dynamics of these critters. And so, yeah, I do believe in a higher being, and I'm very thankful for it because I'm constantly inspired. I had an opportunity to hike in 2.5 miles of, or 2.5 hours of hiking into Presque Isles Gull Point this past fall, just a week before Christmas, and just observed a snowy owl just plucking away at a coot or a duck. I'm not sure which it was because it was all a pile of feathers. And this owl was no further than this gentleman to me. And it was just sitting there in a dusky, cloudy covered day. And to see these organisms at their peak, just doing their thing, just enjoy. Flew around. He was feeding some more, a little further out, probably about as far as that gentleman standing there. And then flew a little further, as far as Trudy, out there in the back there. And it's just amazing to watch these critters. And I'm very thankful that I have the opportunity to render these things. So it's kind of a mixed bag in the sense that I'm compelled to draw them, but I'm compelled to be in the field as well to see these organisms. And I don't get around much anymore as far as hiking. I have my own things that slow me down, but I still like the critters. And this past summer, I had the opportunity to rear a butterfly very similar to the Schaus swallowtail called the giant swallowtail. First time to rear it, a friend of mine, a docent at the zoo, had a butterfly drop in her yard and lay some eggs on her rue. And a rue, as you gardeners would know, can turn your hands dark and kind of, it's a poisonous plant in a sense, but it's used for different types of medicinal cooking or whatnot. And so working with the plant gently, I was able to rear this butterfly. And now I'm looking forward to the day these butterflies come out this spring. I have 4 little chrysalis, and they're just adorable. They're like moss. They're all mottled and special. And I had the opportunity of watching this thing molt from a caterpillar to the chrysalis. And that doesn't happen too often. It's really amazing to see these things and watch nature unfold itself. So I think there's something more to it all, because it could be a peeper frog to a moth to an eagle or a peregrine. I'm constantly amazed by the inherent design and the purposes of color and form and function, how these things are designed and built. I hope that answers part of your question. And next, sir.
2 questions. Did you observe all these animals like the channel catfish, the largemouth bass in the District of Columbia, or do you just understand that they're here? And my second question is, what's the most unusual or the animal that is in the District of Columbia that would be the most surprising to us who live here, that we don't know?
Very good question, because I live in Pittsburgh. I used to live in New Jersey. I've had the opportunity to travel much of the country when I worked in the entomology department. We collected moths and butterflies and beetles from all over the U.S., as far as Utah down to Florida, up to Maine. And I've been on hills, mountains, where people don't hang out. But we collected all kinds of beetles and bugs and moths day and night. I've had the opportunity to travel to the Caribbean twice, Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic.
My question was, what animal did you find in the District of Columbia that would surprise us?
What animal?
Oh, okay.
The ghost moth. I've not collected it here, but it has been collected here in Virginia and in Maryland. It's a small primitive moth that dates back to the Mesozoic. That would probably be the most interesting critter found in DC area. The most unusual critter that a novice could find, or a generalist that just enjoys wildlife and finding critters, I think would be kind of the Arctic tern when it flies through. Or you have this come through here now, the snow goose. These things hang out up in the Arctic Circle. But they come down here to hang out for their winters. Where do we go for our winters when we want to hang out in a warm place? We go down to somewhere south or go over to Europe or something. But these guys come here in the winter when, like today, we think it's kind of inclement. It's perfect for them. They enjoy it. When you see a bufflehead around your ponds or in the small creek, you see a merganser hanging out, a hooded merganser. These are beautiful gems that come into your city districts, and you get to enjoy it. One of the things that astounded me again, and just always does at different cities, is how much natural habitat you have right next to the highways. Perfect for the critters to hang out and do their thing. And that just constantly reminds me how wonderful this country is, because we allow this to encroach upon us in our backyards and just let the nature do its thing. Maybe pull back on the pesticides and let some trees mix in. Let some more milkweed grow in our gardens, in the back of our gardens. Things like that. So I'm constantly inspired by that reality. I hope I answered most of your question there, sir.
Well, I did ask the question, did you see these creatures?
That's true, yes.
Largemouth bass?
The largemouth bass, no. Some of these images I do have to rely on the internet for learning anatomy. And when I was a boy, I did lots of fishing. And as an adult, I did some fishing. My one brother did take me off to out, 20 miles out into sea to catch fish one day when I was in college. And I did catch striped bass, but I've not, a largemouth bass I've only I've fished in Vermont and in New Jersey, not in Pennsylvania or in the DC area. What's interesting is, one of the things I learned when I worked in the entomology department, and I was spreading up all these moths from around the world, there's so much similarity between species from one country to another that if you're in the same family, the species are pretty much the same. And when you go to collect them from one end of the country to the other, they're pretty much acting the same too. So I take that as a given, a reality, and I use that reality to put into my imagery. So I take my experiences of observing fish and then put them into my drawings where I can. And that helps me. And I use the anatomy from the internet of all the people sharing their snapshots and just to learn about the characteristics of the critter. Because the last time that I saw a water snake was this summer on a very wet month. And my daughter had pointed out there was a water snake in her backyard. She described this snake that she saw, and 2 days later my neighbor called me over to her yard, and she had one right there between our yards. Same description as my daughter gave me, because when we went back out to where it was, we couldn't find it. But 2 days later, that exact description was this water snake about 3-4 foot long. And, the tan, a little bit on the side belly, the modeling, the tiny head, the pointy tail. And, so experiences for doing the imagery that I do come from my entire life and come from references from my entire life. So, yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your artwork. It is beautiful. My favorite was the Groundhog. I'm from Pennsylvania. 2 weeks ago, I took a photo at the Archives Naval Memorial Metro, and it's a bird of prey about a foot tall. It looks like a peregrine falcon, and it's ripping apart a bird. And nobody was noticing this. There were people all around, and at first I have a series of photos where it's in the distance, and I get closer and closer, and it's right there. It's right in front of me, and I think I'd love to show it to you. It's a peregrine. It was about a foot tall, and there are feathers and carcass. So I got about a foot from it, and it finally looked at me and picked up its carcass and flew over to the courthouse, where I'd also seen a bald eagle not long ago. So it is amazing, and even more amazing, other people didn't seem to notice it was there.
When I was visiting here in 90, I was just taking a stroll. I was doing a lot of walking then and jogging, and I was strolling in front of the Capitol building, or in front of the lawn, just on the front of the lawn, just to get a snapshot of it, and all of a sudden this red-tailed hawk flies right across. I don't think anyone else saw it. And it just goes right into the trees, and a whole bunch of pigeons fly out. And it was so quiet and ethereal, nobody noticed it. I mean, maybe someone else saw it too, or they just discounted it. Oh, not important, it's not affecting me. But I was enthralled. That memory is constantly with me. And it was just gliding across right in front on a beautiful sunny day like the other day. And so one of my hopes, I didn't have time. I was going to put the Capitol building behind the red-tailed hawk image, but I didn't have time to throw that in there. But people can take this symbolically. Ooh, there's politics in the Capitol. There might be, and there probably is, good and bad and indifferent, I'm sure. But the symbolism, the reality is, we have these critters here. We are very fortunate to have them here, and if we can keep them here, that will be excellent, because then they'll be here for our kids. So, I'm glad you had that experience, ma'am. And I'll be doing a book signing afterwards, so please show me up there. Okay? Any other questions? Yes.
We're out of time.
All right. Thank you very much.
To Mark Klingler for being with us today.
Thank you very much, everyone.
And as Mark said, he'll be signing books upstairs in the archive shop. See you there.